Ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
That introduction was so great that I'm wondering, what have I got to say now? Anyhow, I'm going to say it. And I'm also going to tell you that I'm not going to be thanking anybody now. I will thank them personally. Already, I'm going to go over the time that is allocated to me, and I'm going to go over the period that is allocated to me. So I don't think you have any more time for me to go saying thank you to this one and thank you to that. So I'll just go. My mother's father, as part of the West India Regiment, saw service in Ashantiland. He died when she, his eldest child, was 9 years old, but not before he had told her of his anger at being on the wrong side in that war through no fault of his. And he had expressed his anger at the British for stealing the golden stool of their shanty, at the stupidity of the English children who did not know the existence of black-skinned people, for seeing him walking on the street asked their parents why he had not washed after he came out of the mines. My mother passed on his negative sense of the British and his identification with Africa to me. Her notion of physical beauty there in the 1940s when I was growing up was black skin and thick coil-like hair, which she called Injun, my hair. Thank you. Wow. While my mother was detained by culture, my father's events were more political. He was raised by a white Anglican priest and was in love with English literature. But when the resident Jamaica white master took back a piece of land that he had leased him because he had managed to raise the prized 9 bananas on it, he began to think and talk in terms of colonial, socialist, and communist. Throughout my childhood, he ranted about the national shame of having our cocoa and other raw material sent to England for refinement and returning to us in a form that we could not afford to buy. He ranted too that we had no written history, was pleased that there was going to be a University of the West Indies, and hoped that his children would take it upon themselves to go to this local university there to fill the information gap. For some reason, he was unhappy with my elementary school headmaster, but this stopped when I went home for lunch one day and described what had happened at school. My class had reached a lesson on Drake and Hawkins in our set reading book, when the headmaster called the whole school together, not to beat us with a strap called justice, but to lash into the English for writing a book for Caribbean people like that. He advised us that Drake and Hawkins were not gallant men, as our book wanted us to believe, but thieves who had attacked the Spanish and stolen their bullions. My father sent me back to school with a congratulatory note to the headmaster. I left elementary school and the fastness of rural life with the sense that the world had many people of different physical types, but that mine, black-skinned hair like coconut coir, was the most beautiful. That I was somehow connected to the continent of Africa, where there were powerful artists and the English had fought them and stolen their creations. That through no fault of these not beautiful people, they had historically been ruled by people who did not look like them, people who stymied their progress and lived values contrary to that which they preached and what was right. I said that it was my duty to go to the university and somehow free my people from this monstrous situation. I was not told where beside the local university to find my tools, but since my parents were both rabid platform-speaking members of the People's National Party, I suppose that that party held some of the clues, and I leaned to that for some time. At high school, my black got some definition. It was impossible not to notice that my high school, unlike my elementary school, was one of many catering to students who lived in the area of Kingston which I lived, and I could not help but make comparisons and to notice that the skin color and hair type of those going to my school was darker and kinkier than that of those going to some of the other schools. My school's Cambridge examination results were as good or better than those of these other schools. We regularly won drama and inclusion prizes, but we knew that there were other accolades to garner, such as being chosen to represent the total city population at civic events such as handing the bouquet to the visiting Queen Elizabeth, or even lining the street for the passage of such dignitaries. Here we were noticeably absent. These city population tasks seemed to belong to schools with brown-skinned girls. The state machinery was saying, if you're black, step back. But worse, our beautiful black-skinned teachers congratulating black as by computer, and with singing voice so angelic as our queen. But my loving teachers, black-skinned like us, took their flashlights and microscopes, and went through the school looking for brown-skinned girls to invite into the contest. They took them even when they were blatantly untidy, dunce, and promiscuous. Remember that, G? You don't remember that. Qualities which we knew our school despised, and gave us one of them as our beauty queen. I knew then that there was an anti-black culture in the upper reaches of Jamaican society, and that our elders had genuflected before it. I realized then that my generation could not expect them to lead us black-skinned people to the front of the line. I was forced to note the breach in the black community between me and my elders, and to wonder whether those university graduates who were teaching me and had studied at universities in Canada and England, the brightest black minds, had the guts or consciousness of my role as headmaster to recognize and say that Drake and Hawkins were thieves. At 15, I knew that I would have to take this fissure into consideration in making a life for myself. In my interview for a scholarship to the University of the West Indies, London, I asked the panel what subjects I should do to prepare me to help my people. They said honors history. I got my scholarship and studied honors history. At the end of 3 years, I reviewed my armory and found that I had no tools with which to help my people, although I thoroughly enjoyed my course and I'd done well. The little bit of Caribbean history that I got in my honors history program was really European foreign policy. The only things I found valuable to me as an undergraduate at the University College of the West Indies, London, intent on serving our people, were my experience of caring for a youth club in nearby Augustown, helping to establish a PNP group on campus, and stomping on behalf of the West Indian Federation. For the next 5 years after graduation, I moved from college to college, from the University of West Indies to McGill in Canada, to the University of Washington, from history to sociology to psychiatric anthropology, in the hope of better preparing myself for my work. In the process, I met Lloyd Best and George Beckford. Best and Beckford were of the New World Group. I did not consider myself to be part of it, but I did go to some meetings and did arrange for them a conversation session in the village where I was doing field work, which some say was what caused Gilbert to lose his passport. Through Best writing, I learned that I was and wanted to be an intellectual worker, whose task, by Best definition, was and is to find out what is collectively real to my people, for that is what is politically real, to arrive at that and make it common property. In the first year at University College of the West Indies, Orlando Patterson, an undergraduate in the Department of Sociology, published a field research-based paper which was popularly read and discussed by us his peers. This paper made the point that the fellows, my male colleagues, potential boyfriends and husbands, did not countenance me as a lifelong mate. They wished to marry brown-skinned girls. No one disputed his findings. I knew of white Christians who went as couples to proselytize in Congo, and knew on the contrary that whatever I had to do would have to be done without a male mate. Just as my teachers had shown me that I could not expect them to march with me on my quest to give black-skinned people their place on Martin Luther King's mountaintop, so I could expect no help from my male age mates. It was in 1967 in the USA, a year before this conference's delineating period, that self-definition, company, and a concrete path came to me. As a fellow in psychiatric anthropology in the medical school of the University of Washington, I was given patients. One of them was significant to my own development. He was a white first-year college student, 19 years old. His presenting problem was that he had looked in the mirror in the bathroom he was accustomed to using and did not see himself, whereupon he collapsed and was taken to the hospital for diagnosis and treatment. This lad knew where the mirror was and what his relationship to him was. He had used it several times and knew what of himself he should see, but no, there was nothing. As with most medical cases, his life history with particular reference to his presenting problem was taken. It indicated that he had come to the university from an Orthodox Lutheran home and had left it only recently to live in a hall of residence at the university. Here in hall, he was seeing behavior among peers that he never even imagined, but which was so common among them that he seemed normal, and his definition of himself as a young man had taken a beating. He was in an identity crisis, the doctors proclaimed. I said to myself, like me and my people. We know that books and films show images of people We know that we are people, how come we don't see ourselves in these mirrors? A related question was, since unlike my patient, we had never seen ourselves in the mirror, we could not recognize ourselves even if we did see ourselves. Our identity crisis required not only seeing ourselves, but finding a mirror that will record us. Like the hospital healers, we would have to search our history for an understanding of our problem, in this case, the etiology of this absence, and how to heal it. Historical research and writing about the Black condition would have to be the tool of this intellectual work. In my corner of the USA in 1967, there were many African students, and there were Jamaicans whom I would never have met at home, they having attended small religious schools which did not debate, were not in elocution or dancing competitions, but who were sure of scholarships in American colleges, as unknown as their high school. There were, of course, African Americans in my corner, as everywhere else, ready to blow up bridges, destabilize Ferris wheels at playgrounds, and generally create mayhem. There were also Native Indians. I was very aware of them because my supervisor, Jim Spradley, was studying them. I entered this collage of disdained minority people in the US as a Caribbean Black, until an African American young man said to me, "Sister, they don't ask you to speak before they shoot you." I left that conversation as an international Black, a face shining. Angry Blacks were an expense the American government did not relish. Drunk Native Indians filling their jails was another expense. My medical schools felt that it ought to do something about this condition, then turned to anthropology and psychiatry to establish a course called Social and Community Psychiatry, by which they hope to foster understanding between majority USA and our Anglo minority, and just bring about what Martin Luther King would call the beloved community. One of the underlying concepts of this program was and is that the patient brought in for inappropriate behavior is a symptom of the illness of the wider group of which he is a part. The real patient then is a wider society, and the therapeutic strategies must be directed there rather than the social group or individual presenting with antisocial behavior. It's a long-established part of psychiatric healing using psychotherapy that the patient must be an active part of his therapy. He must be held to insight concerning his problem. The same goes for the sick society. It must be helped to understand it is ill, why, and how. I left the United States of America in late 1968, knowing that along with being an intellectual worker, I was also more than a Caribbean Black. I was an international Black. Knowing that the turmoil that at the gates of the University of West Indies closed, and me from my first week of teaching, was more than a student riot because the government of Jamaica had banned a favorite lecturer. That this commotion was a manifestation of pus leaking out of a rotten social system. I left the USA as a research fellow and came to a job at the University of the West Indies as a research assistant lecturer in the Department of Sociology. I knew at that I was at the very bottom of the power line. Nevertheless, I felt that I was in the right place to be my intellectual work of social healing of my color-coded society. Knowing that my work was to entail the building of a looking glass in which a society could see itself and make changes accordingly. That, as in most therapeutic endeavors, the history of the sick patient had to be carefully taken, that the patient had to be involved in the therapy. Thus I could not, as was popular in academia, focus on communicating with my peers. I had to find a way of discussing my findings with my patients. That happily I was dealing with Native students who, as part of the sick society, could be therapeuticized in the classroom and on graduation go into the world and treat others. One major battle which I waged and won despite my puny position in the power structure was that I would not teach students who were just looking for an additional subject in order to get a degree, but ones who needed knowledge with which to go out into the field to effect social change. In concrete terms, this meant that I worked with trainee social workers, directing their research projects and exposing them to social and normal psychology, and make myself available to do whatever else the department required of me. These my established courses, and whatever else I was required to do, I would structure in such a way that it could be easily absorbed into the toolkit of Black people facing their own in a healing encounter. My formal effort to construct the mirror came with a piece of research which would be published as Abandonment of Children in Jamaica by the Institute of Social and Economic Research, University of West Indies, in 1974. The Child Care and Protection Division, then in the Ministry of Youth and Community Development in Jamaica, said that it was overwhelmed by what it saw as an increase in the number of children abandoned. and approached the Jamaican National Commission for UNESCO for funding and the Department of Sociology and Life for research personnel to help them to understand what they consider to be a phenomenon and to make suggestions to stem it. After statistical work, I applied a historical approach to present the issue. At the end of the work, I was able to prove to the client that the abandonment of children in Jamaica was a part of Jamaican culture, and that the ministry itself was instrumental in creating this cultural tendency. We were able to see that some of us gave up our childcare responsibility to the boarding school, some to the relatives who had done best in life, others to people who felt the need to have a young child in their household. That study helped us to see that parents, whether they were single parents or of double-headed family, regularly shifted their children from their care to that of others, for they felt that the child stood a better chance of social mobility if they followed this path. Parents and natural childminders normally chose from among their significant others the people to whom to shift their children, and these are people whom they consider to be economically and culturally better. These are private arrangements. Not all people the research told us have such persons in their network. These people are those with no prior arrangement, leave their babies to what I call the elements, left them on footpaths, left them in empty buildings, left them at creches and did not return for them, left them in other people's arms, knowing that these people are those who find them in the elements, will either keep them and care for them, or hand them over to the police, who will hand them over to the Child Care and Protection Division of the Ministry of Youth and Community Development, which will have no option but to accept them as wards of the state, supported until they're 18 years of age. Clearly, many Jamaicans had scant faith in their ability to rear their children, but instead of infanticide, trusted that some other party would assume responsibility. The unusual thing then was not that Jamaicans were choosing to abandon their children, but that society had reached a place where some people's network was so economically distressed and socially deprived that they could find in it no one that they felt could better care for their children than themselves. Nobody was going to make a private arrangement to assume their parental responsibility, so they passed them on to strangers and inanimate others. The work managed to be published as a book and was reviewed by the Daily Gleaner. The reviewer stated that it was unusual for such a work to be, as it was, a bestseller. I interpret this to mean that this intellectual worker, having seen something that was real to her people, had taken the other step in the bestial template, caused it to become published, and the general public was indeed glad to see their true face in the mirror. In the early 1970s euphoria of Michael Manley's World is Love, I was trying to be a good intellectual worker and felt that with this work I was on track. I have recently learned how to use two figures to magnify a part of the page on the computer or the smartphone. There were parts of the social place recently discovered which I thought could benefit from this kind of magnification. One of these was the concept of yard as a beneficial entity. In the study of abandonment, we had benefited from a mini study. The Jubilee Hospital, the major maternity hospital in Kingston, had featured in the records as one of the places to which mothers abandon their newborn babies. We had hoped to learn from women about to give birth what could cause them to abandon their babies there, so we interviewed them about those about to deliver. In the course of this conversation, we learned that mothers depended on the yard in which they lived for child care and help, such as supervising their children while they were in the line. It seemed important to our knowledge of ourselves that we know more about this yard, this amorphous inanimate being that operated like a family member. Fortunately, all the money that had been given by the Jamaican National Commission for UNESCO to complete the study of abandonment in Jamaica had not been used. I was allowed to use this to work on a study of yards in the city of Kingston. This I designed as an exposure of the training social worker to the situation that as professionals they would have to face. We approach a study from our truth, the vantage point of ignorance, a doctor having to learn about the patient from the patient himself. What was it that Jamaicans called yards? We did a small survey in a lower-income area and a middle-income area to learn from the Kingstonians what comes to their mind when they hear the word yard. In this way, we learned that the yard was a horizontal entity and that there were several types of yards, but most people knew of tenant yards and government yards. They could describe the properties of a yard and distinguish for us differences between types of yards. With this, we went to persons having face-to-face and daily interaction with these residential forms for help with locating them. We went mainly to policemen and mailmen. With their responses, we created a map of Kingston, showing the areas which were known to be yards. Of these, we studied 27 yards, 19 tenant and 8 government yards, by observation and questioning, and by participant observation over a 2-month period. Of course, we also did library research, tracking down commissions of inquiry into housing in Kingston in the 19th and 20th century. Now, as you know, mirrors can produce sharper reflections when they are cleaned. Our research methodology cleaned the mirror and gave us a clean, clear view of the entity about which we had known little. Now we could see yards as common to thousands of Afro-Jamaicans, senior Jamaicans, and Indian Jamaicans. We saw yards themselves as graduated, people passing through kinds of yards on their way to the owner-occupied dwelling, which they called where the children can run free. We saw women tiptoe around their residential mates and treat them like kings, though it is they who have the contract with the owner of the yard and pay the rent. These women graduate to a space for which the male mate is responsible. The normal yard dealer is a woman. If she's on the cusp of migration from yards, she rates the space negatively, while others speak positively of their experience. Someone to share your thoughts with, friends from whom to borrow things, people to watch over your children. There were challenges, of course, one of which surprised us. This was the treatment of girls 13 to 18. While their male counterparts could kick ball in the yard, stand and eat cane at the gate, and talk to each other, the girls had to help their mother and could not talk to each other, lest, according to them, they teach each other things before time. What are those things? A 13-year-old was beaten. She was sore for speaking with a man. Yet a 15-year-old whom they said, quote, quarrels with a boy as much as brush against her. Distressed them, for they thought her socio-sexual development slow. Girls, it seems, must have the potential, even the desire for mating, but must not do so, it seems, from the position of the surrogates. I consider the research activity and its findings as a mirror in which I saw the portraits of my people. The tool in the hands of this intellectual worker was qualitative research, fashioned in such a way that the field was allowed to define itself, and the native researcher realizing that she was, though a field worker, learning about herself from the mirror of the responses offered. The researcher in this approach is a part of the field. The pronoun associated with the findings of such work are we and us. So, that frown you see on our face, as you field worker and respondent look in the mirror, is the pain and distress that trying to control our daughter's mating brings to us, and is the conflict about their sexuality that burdens our daughters and sisters. A part of our face, this intellectual writer wanted to examine more closely when the opportunity made itself known. Sociologists and anthropologists have been studying the black family in Jamaica since the 1940s. But they, with few exceptions, have not seen this pain. They have not because they have come to viewing us as a proposition that they want to make into a general theory, and not to make a mirror for us to see ourselves, warts and all. A similar problem faces teaching. How do you teach a course on adverse growth and development to train the Caribbean social workers, whom we are preparing for work in the Caribbean, without case material relating to our experiences in Caribbean? I turned to some fiction which I thought presented the interior of lives of Jamaican people. I took into the class the interior of Jamaicans as described by Roger Mace and Orlando Patterson. Sorry, the pages stick a little bit. What do you glue on it? What I saw in the mirrors fashioned by Mace and Patterson were all fears of expressions of love and expressing love, and deep hatred which comes from relating with a social situation over which we feel we have no control. The novels of these two sensitive Jamaicans give us the interior profile of the kind of distress which could bring a person into the intake desk and puzzle the caseworker, for the problem is difficult for the sufferer to articulate. Though these excerpts could be found in a psychotherapist's notes and worked well as case studies of the Jamaican situation, neither of these sensitive novels chose to foreground the confusion of the teenage girls and their mothers with respect to the handling of their sexuality, a part of our faith which I was hoping to have the time and energy to project. Why wait on the men? Why couldn't I, a Jamaican woman, study and make public that aspect of the interior of our Jamaican life? I, who was the reader for a friend who was a respected short story writer. I, who had recently won a prize for a short story. I, who had annually watched my female students, some female students or the other, lose balance when in April I introduced them to studies of schizophrenia. I, woman who by this fact could better understand female sexuality than Pakistan males. I started writing, summoning onto the looking glass like the witch of Endor, a young woman in a catatonic state. She is frozen, forced into inaction by her inability to deal with her sexuality. We follow her animated portrait, identifying with her as she recovers her ability to hear the voices of others, even if she cannot make sense of their words, to recover her ability to feel, her ability to see, if only in still life, and slowly to put all of these together, even if only as miniatures, until she begins to see things in its true proportion, and to take herself back to early life, and to recognize and appreciate the factors which have remained her. This was Jane and Louise in Sweden. Happily, while as an assistant lecturer I was writing this, I got a fellowship to the Institute of Social and Economic Research to research. You might look in any mirror and see that despite years of pinching your nose with a clothespin, it is still flat. You notice that your mother's nose is flat, and so is that of her parents, and you will conclude that your flat nose comes from way back, and a little clothespin will not do. Change requires radical surgery. You have to argue with yourself. Do I want change that badly that I will submit to a surgical dose job? I needed to see whether the cultural patterns I see in yards, such as the conflict for teenage girls over the expression of their sexuality, had a long history. The change which would require a great deal of energy. And was the change worth it? But first, did the conflict over women's sexuality have a historical dimension? Had women born in the first decade of the 20th century experienced the distress brought on by her sexuality, like the teenagers in the Kingston yards of the 1970s? Was this really part of our face? I share an excerpt from an interview I did in 1973 with Auntie Millie, a woman born in the first decade of the 20th century. I was interested in how we women came to establish our own homes. She told me that she had left her parents' home because she had turned big woman, and she had moved in with her lover, who eventually became her husband, Mr. Smith. So I asked her, how you know you turned big woman? She laughs shyly. As soon as you have a go out, and you and anybody begin to talk, you will say, grow up. How you come to leave your mother's house? I asked her. No big woman the turn. But I asked her, you said you turned big woman from the time you was talking to Mr. Smith. She shifts to share a hurtful memory relating to her father. He wouldn't allow me to come out of the house, inquire with me. But I said to her, but Mr. Smith did want you to move out. No, he never wanted me to move out. But when my daddy beat me because me had the stomach, and after him go when we come up here, I in a house, yes, I sit down, same place I get married. Then why your father beat you? I asked her. He beat me sick and me had the stomach. Remember when he beat me, but that time he couldn't manage me. When he beat me with the supple jack, we couldn't bear it again, I hold the whip. Then he gave me 3 big buckets of fire. Auntie Millie's big sister suffered before her the same fate as she did. Yet she made no attempt to shy away from what could make her pregnant and so avoid the beating from her father. Many of the 45 women with whom I talked suffered as Auntie Millie and her sister did. Some were treated as diseased. Their clothes could not touch that of others in the house, lest they be polluted. They had to cook for themselves and in pots different from those used by the rest of the family. They suffered not just from showing a stomach, but from showing the first sign of womanhood. The trauma of the initiation into womanhood started from here, and in most cases, there was no one to guide and explain. All they knew was that a bucket of filthy water was waiting to fall on them, bringing painful social change and an independence from which a family could eventually benefit. Clearly, the conflict over pregnancy and family building had deep roots. The intellectual worker felt that she had found something that was collectively real to her people and had made it public, but shouldn't there be more? Shouldn't the action be transformative? You look at your face to do corrections. Is my mustache evenly distributed as it should? Is the line that I have drawn on my eyebrow too high on my forehead? I happily noted that the looking glass I created allowed people to take corrective action. This realization came with the staging of the work and a comment I eavesdropped. 2 young women were walking from the play. One wanted to talk the usual things. The other told her she had no time for that. She was concentrating on her life and how far she was from self-knowledge. Look where Nelly, that is the main character of the work, reached, and we don't even start to know myself yet, she said. I writing Jane and Lucy will soon come home. I'd shared with at least one Jamaican woman a mirror in which we could see ourselves. With this Jamaican woman speaking to you felt that she had found the instrument best suited to her as an intellectual worker. Fiction, that was my range. The historical study that I had undertaken while I was writing Jane and Lucy will soon come home was another kind of looking glass. You know it? That old one that have leaves, your grandmother have them? Yeah. But there is leaves here. And you can turn the leaves in and out. And you can see the back of your head and you can see people walking outside and out. So that is the kind of looking glass that I found that allows you to see the back of your head as well as the side and the front. As I peered into this old-fashioned mirror to see whether the portraits that had presented themselves at the Kingston Yards had existed at an earlier time, I noticed that there was a kind of halo or a call about the faces. I noted too that my face was in it. I learned the name of this thing. It was knowledge of self as a descendant of Africans enslaved in the New World, and their attendant feeling of being part of a group, a mistreated group. Drug and psychotherapy had shown my patient that his Lutheran upbringing was as valid as the left-wing free love, flower power, irreligious student culture of West Coast America, which had created doubt in his mind and rendered him invisible to himself. Like him, I had found myself, but it was not a pretty self, and I could not stop at just finding my identity. When I used my fingers to magnify our image, I saw that our faces were pockmarked with our particular problems, such as the one I've been talking about, managing the young female sexuality. But such pocks I knew now to be symptoms. We had to find the cause. I would now have to look at the source of and the nature of this inherited pain, which manifested itself in the pockmarks in our face. To see well, I advise you, my friend down there, not to buy reading glasses at the pharmacy, but instead to let the optometrist measure your capacity to see and personalize your spectacles. Peering at us at the looking glass with my custom-made spectacles, I noticed that we look like zombies, like the Bolom and the bow-legged Gwen of Caribbean mythology. I had as an intellectual worker to share this finding as well. The novel mile was the instrument I created to do this work, of sharing my understanding that the disdain by the general public and us ourselves of our culture which we brought from Africa, or which we created in the New World, was what had made us into wandering soulless bodies in the zombies, Bolom, and twins. Having so diagnosed, my next step had to be moving on to healing. The therapeutic path had to be social and community psychiatry. My patient's therapeutic team had applied history to his life to identify the germ of his malady. So would I apply history to his life. But where did our pox life begin? And I said to myself, from my research, it began with the Emancipation of 1838, and that we should interrogate this point. We had been dissed, and were feeling the shame of it. Something like the Emancipation Proclamation, so central to us as the beginning of our life, had not been brought to us for discussion. So ignorant and passive were we seen to be by the state, that even how we should celebrate our freedom was dictated to. If you read the Emancipation Proclamation, the Queen's tell you to go to church and behave as if it is the Sabbath. So social and community psychiatry treatment had to be with 1838. But where would I find an entity to treat? Unlike the Maroons of the 18th century, we the enslaved had no structured organization which the state could treat. I had no powers that allowed me to make concrete in the world society, which I identified as a sick community, having zero part in the constituted discussions and arrangements concerning freedom. I wasn't even a state-employed social worker, and not even a member of the university staff, we having divorced us each other shortly before that. I did what I could to continue my work as an intellectual worker. I considered the village in which I live, to be an interactive social set, and the descendants of Africans living here, myself included, representing clients. My immediate task now was, like the Mile people, to rejoin the spirit of the body. The point of the journey into history is, among other things, to let the patient see what went wrong in his life and where, and from thence facilitate healing. Was my diagnosis even right? While the right and the left battled over the power and the glory in the late 1970s, I stepped into the 12 tribes of Israel, a Rastafarian house, and met Ezekiel. In his 32nd chapter, he related an experience which resonated with me, and I quote, "The hand of the Lord was upon me and carried me out in the spirit of the Lord, and set me down in the valley which was full of bones, and caused me to pass by them round about. And behold, there were very many in the open valley, and lo, they were very dry. Thus said the Lord God, I will cause breath to enter into you, and you shall live. And the breath came into them, and they lived, and stood upon their feet, an exceeding great army." The way I saw it, Ezekiel was telling me that we, the descendants of Africans in the New World, were dry bones, needing but being able to be transformed. This analysis was supported by such statements as that from T.S. Sani, the sociologist brought with the One Commission to investigate the 1938 labor rights, who said that in 1838, a race was free, but a society was not formed. And Rex Netterford often repeated the notion that the emancipation process was incomplete. I began this phase of my work, the Mile phase, by writing with the help of the residents a history of the village, a version of which was circulated in pamphlet form in the village. But I had to ask myself, how can my people see the portraits of themselves in written form if they cannot read? There had to be another form of dissemination of our history, and in a way that could be curative. And getting the sentence back to the beginning, having them experience what their forefathers had experienced, and having them with their minds thus seated in their bodies, critique the past and shape the way forward. The instrument I devised for this was the reenactment of the happenings in 1838, as it related to us then. This was a staging of the Emancipation Vigil and August morning, in which, as far as could happen, actors played the parts of their forefathers, as I imagine their forefathers acted on the eve of that day of freedom. I'm going to play a clip, but I would like to just give you a little back history before I proceed. While I was dealing with these people in this nice big ancient room, they were seeing me, but they were seeing me as a kind of granddaughter who had done well. Me with my car keys and the tape recorder. They assumed that I had something to do with taking away emancipation from them. They loved their emancipation proceedings. And it was not taken away from them, and they were given independence as a holiday. Okay. I promised them that I would give it back to them. I made that promise. And as God was good, it turned out that I was able to do so because I was asked to design a cultural development program. And in it, I asked that they be given back their Emancipation Day. This would come much later, but I did it in my yard with children, and I had lessons with children all through teaching them emancipation. So, though I should be stopping here, I cannot because I have to go on because what happened manifested itself in the night. And we have that clip now. I would just like to add something else. Teacher didn't set up this thing. The parson didn't set up this thing, and these are the important people. And me was not very important. I had taught people, but I didn't tell them how to do this, this vigil. What you're going to see there is what the people did. And I went in at 9 o'clock to find it. Do we have it?
Yes, sir. Yeah, let us put a champion team. A champion team, yeah, tipo now, man. Yeah, like that. Yes, sir. The color juice in the chocolate field. Original, man. No milk powder. It's no onions milk. Strictly color juice. What is the juice, man? Yeah. I remember what you got kilo there, that's all. Yeah. I put this in a black or something else. See. Yeah, man, see you later.
Eventually, the government decided to bring back Emancipation Day, but we had done it before the government did it. Okay, so this is our emancipation. What we do is, on the eve of emancipation, we go down to a cave, and there we have a talk on our business. And the reason why we go down to this cave is because, according to the oral sources, the enslaved people used to go to this cave to talk about their business. And of course, if they were going to want to talk their business, what bigger business than going to be free the day after? So we're sure they must have gone there. So we go there too. And after that, we go on the night of the day before emancipation, which is the 1st of August, to this vigil here, which is my favorite. And then in the morning of the 1st, which is Emancipation Day, we go to a hill where the enslaved people, according to the records, did build their own Christian church. Okay? Then we come down and we have what we call reenactment. And this reenactment is in the form of a play, which we will see what I will need to say something about that. The reenactment didn't start, though I write, the reenactment didn't start as a play. It started as us reading the Emancipation Proclamation, and people responded to the Emancipation Proclamation. And what I did was to write down their response. And the next year we did that and we got more response. So what you see here is a build-up. Of course, as I continue to do research, anything that was new would come into it from me. But by and large, it is the people saying. You might not be able to hear them because they're talking in Jamaican, and they're talking as they feel. So what you're going to get is the quality of the feeling more than the words. Could we have
Apprenticeship, they call it, brother Beck for the apprenticeship.
What? What kind of
My people, the Queen has sent a message for you. It's called the proclamation.
If they had the shit we want to hear about, and that we come here to hear about, we don't care how we come here. Nobody there has to know we care how we come here. Alright, we're there now. We pray. We just never pray. But no providers, no make we care we back. What kind of freedom? We got to. I'm not freedom. We still have people thinking this. Stranger in there. Special to stranger. So what happened? Then Margaret needs some Africa, you know. Margaret needs some Africa. Then I will pay her name there. I won't pay her real people. She just take time and put Morrison in her place.
Morrison? What me name? What do you name give me? We're not going to make book with pen and ink. Margaret names. Who do know Master names? Yes. Then I want to get another name from. Crayfish come from but I'm the crayfish double. Listen to him, because I him know. So never attack, no news, never attack. You don't make you one time. What else see me? Yes. Oh, what color me now? What else see me daughter? Yes.
Sugar.
People, when you see, the father in turn up right there, sir. Make him pull out the pitney finger at the end. What a wicked heart. Then say, for him pitney them can take things as they have a life. But this here one here, Lord. So when you see, I know the color. I will not go through.
Stop.
When you hear about Ferrari,
Yes. What about them?
you're passing. You don't tell them about Ferrari. Ferrari thinks that him do it freedom, and he couldn't take it back. You run them down, carry them back up and say, to go on their ways, God will honest. And God do it for you free. And God do it for you free. But when I take it back, he couldn't kiss them. Because God rise up most part of the Red Sea and make it easy life for them to go through. So then fear it, then we take away your freedom, it's in the hand of God, and in the Moses God sent to guide you. Right? Everyone come back.
Well, we were a very small community, but when the Sunday Cleaner gave one whole big page to our Emancipation celebration, with all sorts of pictures, can you imagine that we were immediately propelled into public understanding? So this made us, put us in Jamaica as a place, Woodside as a place, and our Emancipation as a place. It also meant that people who had left the village wanted to come back, not to stay, but to come back to participate. And people would meet me in the market in Highgate and hug me up and tell me how they're glad for what I'm doing in Woodside. because they can tell people say this is the place they come from. So it had that sort of effect. And we had also families coming from foreign to this event now. Okay. More of us moved from this drama to thinking of ourselves as descendants of Africans enslaved in the New World. Appreciated that our absence from the table of emancipation discussions was central to our illness. Appreciated too that our forefathers in 1838 were not in a position to meet for discussion of their present and their way ahead. Saw that we, with our better intellectual and organizational skills, should be doing what they should have done and vote to meet annually around the time of Woodside Emancipation celebration to examine our condition from this sense of self and purpose. We accepted the argument of Maya that we had been seduced out of our natural trajectory, had our head emptied, and things foreign to us belonging to white space put in it. We agreed that we had been living uncomfortably in white space, and that not only were our faces wearing frowns, but our necks were cricked and turned in the wrong direction. We agreed that in order to realign our heads on our necks and get rid of the frowns on our face, we had to build a black space in which we could discuss matters germane to our existence. We had to rinse our heads and achieve forgetfulness of the kind of knowledge which, as Edward Blyton long showed us, leads to our degradation. This black space should be a place in which we should be able to air our nastiness to each other without shame and learn to deal with it, and where we should be able to acknowledge our prejudice against each other as descendants of Africans enslaved in the New World and try to get past it. We had, for instance, to accept female genital circumcision as part of a culture with which we have been historically associated, and though like most people we abhorred it, we had to dispassionately examine it. We called in the cousins, continental Africans living in Jamaica, to explain it to us. Some of us historically have issues with African Americans who call us monkey chasers and King George's Negroes, and they have been tension between Caribbean peoples. We acknowledge the roots of these emotions with our brothers and sisters in the hope of dispelling them. We paid a lot of attention to African spiritual traditions. They would have been part of our knowledge set, consciousness and practice in 1838. And if we were to go back there to understand our problems, we would have to know that we are intellectually able to analyze this path not taken. Also, our young people were turning to them, and we didn't want this to disturb family relations as a stepping up into Rastafari had done in an earlier generation. Cameron Brathwaite in his contradictory omens speaks to the issue of interpretations. Here he notes Orlando Pattison's interpretation of a Jamaican birth custom as related to the fear of nuptial, when these customs are very clearly resemble birth customs among the African. He concludes, what I'm suggesting here is not that there is a right African explanation or a wrong neuroscientific one, but that a proper understanding of ourselves can only be arrived at by a recognition of both traditions, and that for the Afro-Caribbean, it will be increasingly more just to seek in the first instance African explanation and sources of understanding. If our stumbling block was located in 1838, we would have to, as Brathwaite suggests, find the framework for actions and meanings current among us then. This was clearly part of the work which the intellectual worker would have to do. We would have to turn to what were now called the deep archives. Where are those located? Blackspace is a home of intellectual workers who define themselves as descendants of Africans enslaved in the New World. We meet annually, and since we consider that all people have worthwhile knowledge to share, our classroom asks nothing more than that you take to our reasonings your experience of and thoughts on being a descendant of Africans enslaved in the New World. Remembering, listening, and crediting each other's memories often gets us to the deep archives, helps to fill our black space, and provides hypotheses. After the looking glass, I continue to propagandize using makers, asking to fellowship. The Rainmakers' mistakes ask us to look at and acknowledge our part in our degradation. My most recent fiction, Moments of Cooperation and Incorporation, rewrites Louisiana using orthodox historical data. But how many of us can access these messages? I was happy when Carolyn Allen and Eugene Williams invited me to work with them on a theater piece. Here was my opportunity to show another generation in the technicolor that the theater art allows, the values by which we, the generation that gave birth to them, had lived, and to advise them to see themselves as a continuation of our work. This work was called Ratoon, was not a theatrical success. But I know from invitation to rehearsal that the actors understood that they are part of a stream of African-Jamaican action shining so brightly in the 1970s, that there is a natural process called ratoon, which describes one generation of plants giving birth to another, that the baton is now in their hands. To conclude, the plumber uses a wrench to disaggregate your bathroom pipe and clear the muck that is stopping it from flushing. This intellectual worker uses the imagination, powered by intellectual arts, mainly history and food research, to treat muck. In the process, I found a looking glass fashioned from the lives of 90 persons born in the first decade of the 20th century, the second generation of Africans born free in Jamaica. What linked each one of these together was their association with slavery in the New World and the African white people. I saw in this looking glass myself behind them as the third generation of people of African extraction born free. In concrete terms, all of us in this looking glass were a community of descendants of Africans enslaved in the New World. The purpose of my special skill was clear. It was to find out what was significant to this community and make it public so that together we could create change. What seemed fundamentally significant was the nature of the arrangement of 1838. Building a model out of the village in which I live and work, I've spent a lot of energy trying to get us to examine these arrangements towards straightening out what was bent from them, and made us into soulless zombies and balloons and twisted dread, unable to handle the precious gift to humans, the ability to reproduce and wear all kind in love and peace. I shall end here.